I especially want to thank Brendan for helping me out. My girlfriend Bianca for helping me out.
Bianca, where you at?
Sydney for providing the demo and the picture shots. Hey, Johnny for the excellent performance.
Adam!
You guys keep the Celtic culture alive. I love Celtic culture. Well, y'all know something about myself. When I was 9, I read Lord of the Rings, I watched the movies, I was homeschooled, I had a lot of things on my hands. I fell in love with that shit. And I said, Lord of the Rings is so cool. Where does this stuff come from? Like, where does it come from? And I found out that J.R.R. Tolkien, who was a British professor of Anglo-Saxon studies, he studied a bunch of other languages and shit. He was a huge nerd, like me and about 79% of us here. Am I right? Yeah. So, like, Tolkien, he loved this stuff, and I found out, like, okay, so this guy, he knew all about Anglo-Saxon culture and Celtic culture and all these European cultures, and that's what he made his world based on. You know, it wasn't just made up shit. Like, this is based on real shit. So, you know, when I was, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, I started reading books about Celtic culture and Germanic culture, and that's my life, and that's what I live for. And then now that I got involved in Old St. Mary's, going to German Mass, going to the Irish Heritage Center, like, this shit's still alive. It's still going. Like our language, English, like, there's a lot of white guys out there that they love Viking stuff. They're like, oh, Viking stuff's so cool. And then a lot of people are like, bro, you're not Scandinavian, you can't relate to that shit, you aren't descended from that shit. That's bullshit, because English is a Germanic language. And a lot of people don't know that. Woo! A lot of people don't know where we came from. A lot of people think that American mainstream culture is just it's like the default. It's just some stupid bullshit that came out of nowhere. They think that white people have no culture. They think that, like, they don't understand where things come from. And, like, you gotta understand is a lot of, like, what's around you, it came from somewhere. It has ancient heritage. It goes back thousands and thousands of years. And you gotta understand where that shit came from. All right, so let's begin. Celtic culture. What is it? Who were they? Who were the Celts? Does anybody know? Does anybody know? Any wild guesses? I'm just trying to feel like what average people like know about the Celts. Yes, sir.
As one of the first original tribes of Europeans, besides the Teutonics.
In a sense, kind of.
It was the dominant culture in the North Sea area for a
Yes, the
period of time.
Celts were the dominant culture of Europe for quite a long time. That is correct. Any other answers? No. All right. A lot of people think it's just like Ireland and Scotland, but we'll get into that. All right. So who were the Celts? Many theories abound. Many are wrong. No offense, homie. What you said was kind of it's like a little true, but not entirely true. All right. So some people think that the Celts were the original inhabitants of Europe. They were the original Cro-Magnons, the original cavemen. They were there first before anybody. The people who believe this are usually liberals and hippies, and here's why. A lot of white people from Ireland and Scotland, they want to identify with their roots, but because they're liberals, they don't like people who conquer people. They identify with the Scottish and the Irish because they were natives, they were indigenous people defending themselves from the evil Romans and the evil Germans and the Germanic tribes and the Anglo-Saxons. So they kind of like seeing themselves as the people who were always fighting just wars, defending themselves, and never invading anybody. That they are, like the original inhabitants. But that's not entirely true. So a lot of liberals believe that. Other people think that they were the original inhabitants of Europe. I don't even need to explain to you guys why that's wrong. Some people think that they were a lost tribe of Israel. A lot of Christian white supremacists believe this, and the medieval Irish believe this because they felt a need to kind of find like a connection to Christianity because they didn't want to see Christianity as a foreign religion. But that's not really true either. So these theories are all believed by many different people, a lot of common people. But the fact of the matter is, none of them are really quite correct. I hate to say this, the truth is complex. So who were the Celts really? They were an ethnic group and a language group that dominated Central and Western Europe during the Bronze and Iron Ages. Now a lot of people associate the Celts with Britain. They think, well, not England, but the rest of the British Isles. So like Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, stuff like that. And the fact of the matter is that's where they ended up. That's where Celtic languages are alive today. But that's not where they started. They actually started more in Central Europe, and I'll get to that in a second. All right, so before we get in here, before we move on, I need to explain something. All European ethnic groups are a mix of 3 ancient populations. a lot of nationalists don't like this, but it is facts. Like all European groups come from 3 groups, and I'm going to get into that. So they all come from one group called the Paleolithic hunter-gatherers. Paleolithic means Old Stone Age. And the second group that migrated into Europe was the Neolithic farmers. They came from Turkey. And then the third group was the Indo-Europeans, which came from around Russia and Eastern Europe. Moving on. So the first wave of European immigration. You gotta understand, the Celts, they kind of came from elsewhere, they kind of didn't. So like you said, they were one of the original tribes. I hate to break it to you, homie, but Celts were not the first people in Europe. The first people, well, it depends on what you consider humans. The first humans were Neanderthals. The second group of humans that were actually Homo sapiens, like our species, were Cro-Magnons or Paleolithic hunter-gatherers. The Paleolithic hunter-gatherers were, according to mainstream science, humans came from Northeast Africa and they branched out. One of the groups that went into the Middle East and Israel was haplotype IJ. Not all of you know what a haplotype is. Not a big deal. I'll have another lecture about genetics. That's a whole other thing. Basically, the first people into Europe branched off from Arabs. About 40,000 years ago, they were the first ones in Europe before the Ice Age. They were the only ones that stayed in Europe during the Ice Age, because when the glaciers came south, a lot hung out in Spain and Italy and Greece. They killed all the Neanderthals. And then when the glaciers melted, they went back up north. So this group, I'm descended from them, by the way. I'm haplotype I. Where's my haplotype I at? Caleb?
T.
Yeah, so if you're a girl, you don't really know what you're
That's maternal.
Yeah, that's maternal.
Yes,
Anyway.
maternal.
Yeah, so the first people in Europe were, some people call them cavemen, some people call them Cro-Magnons. They hold up. Yeah, so they had dark hair, they had blue eyes, and tan skin, and they were short, kind of like me. My genetics matched them the most, but I don't have blue eyes. Moving along. So major accomplishments. They were like a lot of other hunter-gatherers throughout the world. They didn't build a whole lot of stuff, but what they are known for is they made some of the oldest cave paintings in the world. Have you guys ever heard of Chabot Cave or LaCroix Cave? It's more than just a sparkly beverage. LaCroix Cave had some of the oldest cave paintings, so that's kind of cool. And their religion was, they were animists, they worshipped animals, they were basically shamans. Alright, the second wave of immigration to Europe was the Neolithic farmers. So these people came from around Turkey. They were related to the people in the Middle East that, came up with beer and stuff. So they brought wheat to Europe. So when they came to Europe, Europeans didn't need to hunt as much. They started growing wheat, they started drinking beer, they started domesticating animals. And these people they were dark-haired and dark-eyed, but they were a little bit lighter skinned, and they were also short, kind of like me. Alright, these people venerated Mother Earth. The reason why is that they grew shit. So the first group worshipped animals a lot because they hunted animals. The second group worshipped Mother Earth. So they made all these statues of women with big titties and big booties because that's what they were into. And they were very into the seasons and agriculture. And the big thing, so in Southern Europe, their genetics are very dominant. And the reason why Southern Europeans look kind of Middle Eastern is because these people related to Middle Easterners. But in Northern Europe, their genetics didn't last. But what did last was teaching people how to farm and making these Neolithic monuments. So like Stonehenge, the standing stones of Colonish, all the different types of dolmens and menhirs. Who's been to Ireland and Scotland? Okay, we got a few. I've been there myself. I spent 3 days hiking on Isle Lewis, and I went to the standing stones of Colonish. Now, I am Catholic, but I went and I touched every single stone, and I did feel like a sense of attachment to my ancestors. So, yes, I am Catholic, but it did feel a little spiritual, I'm not going to lie. So don't any Catholic people lynch me, but that was a very, very cool experience. All right. But here's the thing you got to understand is that Celtic culture, as we think of it today, mostly came from the third wave of European immigration. And as far as the modern Celtic countries today are concerned, they're genetically, 80% of the genetics of Ireland and Scotland come from this population, the third wave of immigration. Not the Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, not the Neolithic farmers, but the third wave of immigration was the Indo-Europeans. They were a lot have blue eyes and green eyes and shit. So they were a lot more blue-eyed than me. So, I'm kind of a caveman. I got caveman genetics. I ain't that hairy, but I got caveman genetics. It's cool. But anyway, so yeah, who were the Indo-Europeans? Who were these guys? They were steppe pastoralists. Does anybody know what a steppe is? With two P's and an E at the end.
Like Mongolia.
Sure, yeah, whatever, kind of. They weren't that far east. They were more like around Ukraine. So steppes is like foothills and mountains and shit. All right. So these people lived around Ukraine and Russia like 10,000 years ago. They were tall, they had blonde hair, they could digest milk and alcohol. They were warlike, they had bronze weapons, they were very patriarchal, and they worshipped sky gods. They weren't so much into Mother Earth, they weren't so much into like animals and shit. They were into like thunder-wielding sky gods. Like, think like Thor, think Zeus, think Jupiter. All those gods have, yeah, so like I said, they started around Ukraine. So they were from the steppes. This little map here in the green, these are the steppes. So the western steppes is where the Indo-Europeans would have been. The eastern steppes is where the more Mongolian type people would have been. Alright, so yeah, that's just another illustration of the steppes. So the thing about the steppes is that these were flat areas that horses could run through. This is like a highway for horses. So the reason that the Indo-Europeans were able to conquer Europe so easily, and the reason why the Mongolians did later, is because these steppes provided a highway for horses. Alright, so yeah, as I already described, steppes are grasslands on the foothills and mountains, good for nomads and stuff. Alright. Fun fact, the Indo-Europeans buried their dead in mounds, as other Europeans were already doing. These kind of mounds are called kurgans. Has anyone seen the movie Highlander? Okay, well, the bad guy was from Russia, and they called him the Kurgan. And these mounds are called kurgans. So, that movie was made in the 80s. They hated Russians back then. Yeah, these are examples of kurgans. They're burial mounds. You see them in Western Europe, Eastern Europe. You see them in, like, Mongolia and stuff. So, yeah, as I said, so the Indo-Europeans, they worship Father Sky, Mother Earth. The sun was usually masculine, the moon was usually feminine. So that kind of influenced languages today. Also, something people need to understand is back before people had writing, people had passed down information orally. So they told stories around the campfire. So nowadays, like, we all speak English, right? How many of us are Christian? So Christianity did not develop in Europe, right? It's a Semitic religion, but yet we speak an Indo-European language, which English is Indo-European, like Celtic. We speak an Indo-European language, yet we have a religion that's from another place. The reason why that's possible is writing. People used to not write. People's mythologies used to be passed down orally. So there's a in the past, in pre-literate societies, there's actually a correlation between language and religion. Because, if some tribe killed all the men in your tribe and took over your tribe and forced you to speak your language, you wouldn't keep passing on the mythology of your ancestors. You take on theirs. So what you got to understand is that as the Indo-Europeans, this third wave of immigration, moved into Europe and forced Europe to speak their languages, their mythologies were all very similar because mythology tends to be passed down linguistically. So in all of these different languages, you got in Celtic mythology, you had Tyrannus, who was a hammer-wielding thunder god. You had Thor, who was a hammer-wielding thunder god. Karun, who was a hammer-wielding thunder god. And Indra of Indian mythology. North India was colonized by Indo-Europeans. A lot of people don't know it. So believe it or not, the languages that are spoken in Northern Europe are more closely related to English than Finnish or Estonian or Hungarian are. Fun fact. But anyway, yeah, Finno-Ugric, you know your stuff. Alright, so about 8,000 years ago, the Indo-Europeans got tired of watching their cows eat grass all the time, and they started expanding out of the steppes. Some went east, and they became Iranians and North Indians. When I say became, I really mean they were the ruling class. They didn't change the genetics that much, obviously, because the original Indo-Europeans would have looked pretty European. They were white people, and Indians and Iranians are not. So it's really the ruling class. But anyway, they went into Europe, and well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Yeah, they went into Europe and they kind of killed all the men, married all the women. And they split into two big groups. And I didn't write any notes for this, but I know it off the top of my head because I'm a nerd. But there were two big groups. There was an eastern group that went east and a western group that went west. The western group is dominated by haplogroup R1b. Not everyone knows what a haplogroup is, but when a man and a woman make love, if they have a male child, that male gets the Y chromosome from the dad. And that gets passed along, and it's easy to trace ancestry through the Y chromosome. And the reason why it's easier to trace Y chromosomes is because it's Y-shaped and X-shaped chromosomes. Most chromosomes are X-shaped, and they kind of like mix DNA with each other. But anyway, Y chromosomes and mitochondrial DNA can help trace who your dad's dad was and who your mom's mom was. Anyway, haplotype R1b is strongest in Western Europe. 50% of Western European males have haplogroup R1b, and it is thickest in Ireland and Scotland, and there's a little part of Russia where it's also very thick, and that's where red hair and freckles and green eyes are the most common. R1a is more common in Slavic Europe, and that's where they have a lot of blonde hair, blue eyes, but not so much the red hair. Anyway, R1b was thickest around here. There was a big culture here called the Hallstatt. They were a Bronze Age culture. And some of them went north and became Germanic speakers. I'll have another lecture about that. Some crossed the Alps, went down here, became Italic speakers. This is where Latin came from. I'll have a big lecture about that. But the bulk of them stayed here, and their languages became Celtic. And for a long ass time, like 2,000 years, like the Celts started out around here. They spread out. So the yellow shows where the Celts started. The light green shows their maximum expanse. And the dark green shows where Celtic languages are still spoken today, and I'll get to why that is the way it is in a bit. Moving along. Alright, so the Celts were badass. I originally made this lecture for an all-male audience, so I had a bunch of warfare porn. So here's some cool pictures. Here's some cool pictures of ancient warriors, because I really like this stuff. I love it. Yeah, so the Hallstatt culture was in the Bronze Age. The Indo-Europeans started migrating around the Bronze Age. And then, they developed into the Iron Age. But anyway, I do have a Bronze Age sword that I bought off a dude from New York. I got this at a discount. So it ain't like the shiniest, but I bought this off a dude from New York who casts his own bronze sword. So please pass this around. It's like elementary school show and tell.
Renaissance festival.
I use it in boxing.
I got to teach.
Was that? Yes. Yeah, we're gonna LARP with steel.
Real steel bronze sword.
And then when society developed when we